Greetings sailors and welcome to a viewer warships replay. Today it's going to be the Richelieu, and this is actually one from not that long after 7.2 came out, so there's quite a few French battleships in this one, and in this case it's being driven by the magnificently named Sheep Are Friends, and as an honorary Scotsman I can say, oh yes. Yes, they are indeed. Anyway, so, moving swiftly on. This is an epicenter game. In fact, just like the previous replay, my Galissoniere match that went up a couple of days ago. It's the exact same scenario, same map mode, but this time rather higher tier. Although, having said that, it's only one tier higher, but this time it's from the perspective of, you know, one tier. Well, two tier higher compared to... Yeah, okay, let's just move on before I get myself into any more knots. It's a tier 8 game and it's epicenter, that's all you need to know. Personally, I don't mind epicenter games in the mid-tiers, but I think above, say, tier 7, it starts to get a bit less enjoyable. And certainly tier 10 epicenter games I really don't enjoy at all. So that's something I wish they would limit to, you know, like... tier 7 at most, maybe perhaps even tier 6, because after that point the kind of the power gap between tier 6 and tier 10, you know, the bigger guns and the more powerful torpedoes and the radars and the bigger carriers and all the rest of it, it makes it a much less fun experience. So that's a nice broadside cruiser. Let's see if RNG will bless his salvo, and as it turns out, yes, it does. So that's not a bad first shot. Well, actually, that wasn't really his first shot, but it was his first proper salvo. It was a nice chunk of damage to take off an unwary cruiser. This is going to end up being quite a defensive game in this one, and what Sheep Are Friends does actually for a fair chunk of this replay kind of reminded me of a previous game featuring pricey gaming, and I've therefore decided to dub this particular island here as Pricey Island, because Sheep Are Friends is going to make much the same use of it, although I believe Pricey's game was in a destroyer, so it's not like the Richelieu is quite as sneaky as that, but still it's going to provide much the same sort of service. So there's one of the enemy Leons, again a nice broadside target, not quite as big a hit this time, but 10k still not to be sniffed at, and if he can just keep his front pointed at all these nice enemy targets, then he ought to do reasonably well for himself, because of course this thing has all its guns at the front, as you've probably noticed. It's actually the same number of guns as the Bismarck and the Tirpitz. It's 8 in total, and it's 15-inch guns, so it's the same caliber as well. But unlike those ships, of course, which have 4 turrets, this only has 2, and that gives you a bit less flexibility. I mean, not only do you have all of your guns at the front, but you only have the choice of firing half or all of your guns. It's not like, you know, the Tirpitz where you could go, okay, I'm just going to fire 1 turret, I'm going to fire a quarter of my guns and see if that's all that's needed. So it gives you a little bit less flexibility in that regard, but the upside is that as long as your ship is pointed towards the enemy, you always have all of your guns available and you don't have to angle out at all. So it's kind of a swings and roundabouts situation. Sometimes it's going to be something that actually is quite useful, and you're not going to mind the fact that you have to fire half or all your guns at once. So that was a very bold move by that Shinonome, perhaps a bit too bold considering that he was sat there and had all his guns pointed at this guy, and that there was the Mars here as well. That was a bit silly considering how relatively early it is in the match. I mean, there's no reason why they couldn't have dropped torpedoes from further away, and instead they got greedy. They tried to make an ambush around the corner and it all went so very badly, horribly wrong. The enemy team at this point, well, there's 2-ish groups of them, as you can see. Sheep Are Friends' team is more or less in one blob, and they've actually gotten and held the cap circle for quite a long time, because the enemy team seemed to take quite a long time at the start to actually get in and contest. So the only part they don't have is the very centre, which at the moment is being held in contention by sheep, our friends, and this Mars. So there's another citadel. It was a very nice shot, and that's almost 60k damage even already, which is, you know, not a bad start. But if the match ended right now, it'd be a bit, you know, it wouldn't be a good match particularly with that amount of damage. But there's still plenty of enemy ships to chew through, and this one is looking like it's going to be a bit of a war of attrition, because both teams are quite firmly entrenched. Neither team is in a position to really push on the other one in any particular way. His team perhaps on this flank could make an aggressive push north, because there's 3 of the enemy battleships over to the east, but they would still be able to come under fire from those ships to the east. So I don't know, like, I'm just looking at this, looking at what his team is doing, looking at what Sheep Our Friends is doing. Is this the right thing to do under the circumstances? I mean, his team doesn't seem inclined to push, but possibly if he was trying to, some of them would come with him, but maybe that would be giving his ship away. And of course there's a carrier in play as well. He makes himself too attractive a target for a carrier. I mean, this thing's got decent AA, but it's mid-range AA, and so the planes have to be pretty close before it really kicks in. The outer AA isn't particularly good at all. It's only got a base of, what, 65, 66 DPS, something like that. And you can, of course, buff that, but this isn't a ship you would put manual AA on. This is one that would get the most benefit from just AFT alone, because of course that would also help the secondaries, and the secondaries are really very good in terms of range. So 2 bounces and a citadel from that shot. This Richelieu is trying to creep forwards and put on a bit of pressure, and they've actually, you know, they've been slowly losing some ships, and the enemy team's been slowly losing some ships, but neither side really has a decisive upper hand in numbers at this point. So this one is still really too close to call. Normally by the 12-ish minute mark you have some idea of which team has the upper hand, but in this case, apart from holding the cap circle, it really is very, very close. And despite having that points advantage from, well, actually no, I don't think they will have the points advantage, will they, because it will count as a contested cap circle. So yeah, it's really, you know, on a knife edge at the moment, and it could go either way. So that's another nice broadside battleship. He's getting all the broadside targets to shoot at right now. Well, right now, you know, in this game. And he's been able to get some fairly nice salvos out of it as a result. He's now up to almost 100k damage, and it looks like he might even get another shot off against this Leon, who is maybe trying to turn away. It's not really, it actually just looks like they're going in a straight line, to be honest. And it's not like this Leon can be unaware he's being shot at by another battleship. Now that wasn't quite enough lead that time, and RNG wasn't quite as kind anyway, but this Leon is just seriously tempting fate, and it's not a recipe for success. It really isn't. I mean, the Leon's a bit of a silly ship anyway. You have to show quite a lot of broadside to get all of those guns on target, and even just showing 2 turrets, you still have as many guns available as the Richelieu, but they are rather a smaller caliber, of course. So they've just steadily lost enough ships at this point to where it's not looking so good now. The enemy team has a serious points advantage. It looks like the enemy team just repositioned enough to get more shots down onto his own team's blob, and although they've taken some casualties and taken some damage in the process, they have now definitely got the upper hand. So having said a mere, what, 2 minutes ago that it wasn't really clear at that point who was winning, it now very much seems like it's the enemy team. And with this Gneiser now seemingly about to go down, well, it's looking that bit the worse. So the Mada tries the same thing that the Shinonome had, but in a slightly more sensible fashion. They waited until there was a bit more distraction going on, but of course there's a Mars here. the Mars has Hydro, so we'll see how that works out for the Madder, because of course the Mars can torp the Madder, but the opposite isn't true. The Mars is air spotted right now though, so it looks like he's going to get gunned down before he gets close enough to actually use that Hydro. That's presuming of course it wasn't on cooldown, but they did get their torpedoes away, and that is going to be the end of the Madder, which is very, very useful for Sheep, because it means he doesn't have to go forward and try and deal with that. He probably will have to go forward at some point soon anyway, however, because that's a Leon coming up behind him. And although he does have some guns on the back of this ship, they're all secondaries. So he might set some fires, but he's unlikely to kill this guy without bringing his main battery around into the process as well. And that might be a little tricky because there's also a Monarch on the other side. Now, apart from the Lexington and an allied Leon, there's not a lot left. In fact, there's nothing left. That's it. That's the entire rest of his team. But the enemy team is similarly diminished. They've still got a bit of a points deficit going on, but at this stage they have at least brought it back even on ships, and that's a low health New Orleans, so yeah, that's worth taking out of the mix. So that's one less enemy ship. They are now once again dead even, and this time when I say they're on a knife edge, it really does feel like they're on a knife edge. This could definitely go either way. It super comes down to just these last couple of players and what they do. So rather than engage two ships at once, he's going forward for the Monarch, and that Leon has actually broken off to go after their carrier anyway. This Monarch is also one of those HE firing British players, which is not that good of an idea in the Monarch. I mean, it still works, it's still battleship HE, but it doesn't have the monster fire chance that some of the other ships of the line do. And in fact, more of them really should be like the Monarch and have a more normal fire chance. It still has the extra HE penetration, of course, but it's just much more like regular battleship HE, so it doesn't have that chance of setting, you know, multiple fires with a single salvo, which makes the Conqueror such a fun and balanced ship. So, the carrier is now paying a bit of attention to him, the enemy Enterprise, and has knocked off a big chunk of health. He had to burn his damage control party, but you'll notice the fires aren't going for very long when he does get set on fire, so he's got at least some survivability skills here, and that is possibly going to prove to be the difference in this game. I mean, we'll see. We don't know what the outcome is yet, he says, knowing the outcome, but having, you know, multiple fires burning, having fires burning for longer, at this stage of the game, when you've not got a lot of health left, you don't maybe... Well, I mean, he has still got heals. He's not had to use a lot of heals up till this point, but potentially not a lot of heals left. The difference between, you know, burning an extra 10 seconds or not, or whatever, that could make a big difference. The friendly Lexington did do a thing that helped as well. They tagged their fighters onto Sheep Our Friends, and so at least one of those torpedo bomber drops was disrupted. So it was really the first drop that was the dangerous one. The next one he was able to somewhat dodge, and that will have made the difference because he's not sitting on a lot of health right now. And if this Leon was actually firing HE, this might be a situation where you would fire HE, they could possibly dispatch him with a single salvo, and as it is, they've angled enough to get all their guns on target, but they are really struggling to get the finishing blow. And it's actually his secondaries that set fire there, which of course Sheep Our Friends immediately extinguished. So with his 15-inch guns, he was able to overmatch the bow. Goodbye, Leon. And if you're wondering what the Monarch was doing during all of this, sitting there waiting for the Leon to finish him off, I guess? I can't really tell you. Maybe they were trying to back up and it just took them a really long time to do so. But when you see their position, it doesn't so much seem like that's the case. It just kind of seems like they were sitting there waiting to see if the Leon would do the job, and if they didn't, then waiting for Sheep Our Friends to come around the corner. Now that was the moment of maximum danger, because that was the point where he came down to a fairly low amount of health. But we're not out of the woods yet, because this monarch is still alive and kicking, and the carrier has cycled their planes, and so he's now got even more to deal with. But the Enterprise seems to have more or less run out of dive bombers by this point. So all they've got left are the torpedo bombers. And when I say all they've got left, well, I don't think it was an AP Enterprise. I think this was an HE bomb Enterprise. But the torpedo bombers are, you know, maybe a little more vulnerable to his AA. And because he's next to the island like this, the carrier player has to either drop from behind or else have his planes longer in the AA aura. So that's the Monarch done for, and he did take some damage in the process, and can he avoid taking the next one? There we go. That right there on the nose, you would think that would have killed him, but for one thing it's an airdropped torpedo, and for another thing his bow is fairly damage saturated at this point, meaning there's only a fairly limited amount of damage that can be done to it. So yeah, it really was, you know, the fact that he took so much damage earlier on that saved him there, if anything. So I've skipped on ahead a little bit because there's going to be one final wave of planes to deal with, and at that point, I mean, there aren't any other enemy ships, so it just comes down to, can the carrier finish him off? And he has been able to get his final heal going, so he can take a couple of torpedo hits, and as the carrier again, they seem to be running out of these planes now as well. As the carrier only seems to have this one half squad available, it does seem unlikely that they would get to kill him unless they maybe detonated him, maybe, which is possible with airdrop torpedoes. It just doesn't happen very often. So there's the drop, and he actually gets 2 more kills. He must have a reasonable amount of AA left still, despite the amount of HE spam he took from that Monarch, because he's managed a fair few air kills in this one. But yeah, I mean, as it was, that just wasn't enough of a strike left. So as they are now ahead on points, as we are now in the dying seconds of the game, basically they've won. I did wonder if there was another squad lurking nearby, if the Enterprise was maybe hoping to set a flooding with that first squad and then they were going to bring in the second squad, but it seemed like they were just out of planes otherwise, because if that was the plan, they're kind of running out of time to do it. So the enemy carrier gets to live, but more importantly, Sheep Our Friends gets to live, and with over 600 points versus less than 300, they have quite comfortably won. Except it wasn't really a comfortable win at all, was it? That was quite a close thing all the way along, and it was mainly down to the fact that it was an epicenter game. So 192k damage done, 3098 base XP, which is pretty damn good, and a Kraken alongside the Dreadnought, of course, as well as a Confederate and a High Caliber. Now, I don't have the final screen to show you the credits and XP, so I don't know what his final result was in that regard. Hopefully he was running some flags to take advantage of that very, very nice base XP result. But yeah, I mean, what is there more to say about that other than it was a very, very close, tense, well-played game. And it's the kind of carry that people play battleships for, quite frankly. Cruisers are dangerous in their own way, but up until you get to the high tiers and cruisers having their own heals, they just don't have the staying power for that kind of result. It was the fact that he had a battleship heal available that kept him in that fight. And although not every battleship game is like that, far from it, I'm sure it's the hope and dream of having games like that that keep a lot of people playing. So, well done, Sheep Our Friends. That was a very, very entertaining match. And, well, if the rest of you thought so as well, you can hit that like button, you can leave any comments below, you can sub to my channel if you haven't already, and, as always, stay tuned for more.